What's up, guys? It's Will, Braden, and Brock here, and we're here to talk about Martin Luther King today. It's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And yeah, I'm gonna pass it off to Will.
Okay, we're just going to have a brief introduction and mention that this is part of the MHK Project. On January 19th, 1968, just months before his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Kansas State University and delivered a message of unity and nonviolence and justice. That message echoes today, right here in Manhattan, Kansas. The few main points that we're going over today, we have 3 segments. The first one's going to be why MLK came to K-State in the first place. Second is going to be what he said and why it mattered and kind of the impact it has. The third is going to be how his message applies today and what we can learn from it locally and globally, like the MHK Project is supposed to do.
Facts, I like that.
So, Will, tell me why Martin Luther would want to come to Kansas and to Manhattan to give a speech to college students at K-State.
So the speech was part of the convocation series that Dr. King was invited to. It was in its infancy at the time. This series lasted from 1967 to 1997, with having over 200 speakers come talk about different topics. President McCain, who was the president of K-State at the time, thought it was important for students to hear viewpoints from different speakers across the world and different issues facing the world that weren't directly facing Manhattan, Kansas, but was still important, and he wanted them to be well educated about it. McCain received a lot of criticism for inviting Dr. King. He was even called a communist stooge because King's viewpoints on Vietnam were not very popular at the time. He was against Vietnam, which had a lot of uproar in the Manhattan, Kansas local area. It's also not a good time to be a speaker at Ahern in 1968, as RFK was also assassinated only a few months after speaking there as well.
Kansas wasn't even that racist at the time. It was but a lot of people,
compared to the South, it definitely was not.
Compared to the South, it wasn't. So you would think why did he want to come here to talk and not somebody that's somewhere more where it's more prevalent? But we could get into this later. But a lot of people from K-State, even Greek life and stuff like that, even noticed a lot of the subtly racist undertones that Kansas kind of had at the time.
Well, there's this one guy in one of the documents I got from the research department at K-State where he had grown up in a southern state, and he moved to Manhattan. And it was just totally different compared to what it was in the South. It was still it wasn't perfect. Obviously, there's still a bunch of racism, but not near as much as there was in the South.
Yeah, kind of back off what Brayton and Brock was saying. I think you mentioned it in one of the articles that we looked at for our resources. Sue Mays talked about in the Greek life how in Manhattan, when in her sorority, they pledged to be white Christians, and this shocked her. And I don't think people of color were even allowed to be in Greek life, which is kind of crazy. And some other examples of Manhattan not being perfect. Many talked about from this article microaggressions that took place even at Manhattan MHS. Some counselors advising black students to not go to college and become secretaries or janitors.
I remember that.
And even though there wasn't any, what was the word that Hildebrand used? De jure? It wasn't of the law that black people need to live on one side of the town or the other.
It was de facto.
It was
de facto.
De facto. But I think this would fall under the term of redlining. But they talked about in this article that most African American families lived on the south side of Points.
I thought it was Yuma.
That is the south side of Points.
Oh, you're right.
It's Colorado area where Yee's Oriental Market is. Yeah.
Brayton had to go touch grass for a second, but we're back here with Will. He'll be back in a little bit. But Will, what do you have to say, Will?
So, from the same article that we kind of been referencing that was talking about the racial discrimination in Manhattan, Kansas, Billy Hill, who was interviewed in this Mercury article, said that he was told by an MHS counselor, not to throw MHS under the bus so much, but that no one would ever hire a black mortician because he wanted to go into the field of cremating dead bodies and stuff like that. And he believed them, and he said that he regretted that a lot. The cool part of the story is that now his daughter is a black female who owns a funeral home and lived out his former dream.
It is fascinating how times have changed.
And the stuff that we're saying about like people from MHS, it's not to like hate on them. It's just to like reflect on the time and like how things were and how much progress we've made since then.
In our own community too.
And just like people think it's like, oh, we would never do that, but it's just we're kind of reflecting and talking about how it used to be and how like at the time like we probably would have done the same thing, but like times have changed and it's better now.
A little transition to the next point is that even at the speech, there were protesters outside of Ahern, but it wasn't for the civil rights issues that you might think immediately. It's not like they were all racist. It was mostly against his thoughts on Vietnam.
And now we're transitioning into what MLK said in his speech, basically.
So a big topic at the time was a lot about Vietnam and how controversial that was at the time, and a lot of disproportionately like poorer people and black people were getting drafted into the war. And so I mean it would just be horrifying or very scary to just like any day you could just be drafted into this war and you're forced to go fight in it for your country that you don't like really respect their decisions and kind of like their antics at the time, and you just have to go and do that and you don't really have a choice. It'd be very sad. And we interviewed somebody who at the time he went there.
I felt bad for what was going on in our country with all that unrest, and besides the civil rights unrest, then I was right in the middle of all of that Vietnam stuff.
Yeah.
So I enrolled in ROTC, Air Force ROTC, to give myself some protection, because if you were going to get drafted, if you were in ROTC, they would let you stay in, and you could then go into the military as a lieutenant after you graduate. But another first I had was I was in the first lottery draft. Mm-hmm. And I had the number 263, I'm pretty sure was my number, based upon my birth date. And November 3rd was drawn 263. And you were pretty much guaranteed that if you were that close to 365, you weren't going to get drafted. The people that, were drew in the first part of the draft. So I dropped out of Air Force to ROTC when I thought I was going to be okay, but I had classmates and other friends from me that went to Vietnam. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so his speech, one of the sources we credited was his Beyond Vietnam speech, which I think we had to do something about in class. Oh, no, that's what it was over. Yeah, that quiz was over.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was one of the things that I at least did in my resources, which he didn't give that exact same speech. Obviously, he didn't give the Beyond Vietnam speech in Ahern, but it was similar topics.
Okay, here are some fun facts from what happened there. So, the suit that he was wearing was actually the suit that he was wearing whenever he gave his final speech where he got shot. Very unfortunate. But also, they found his notes in his suit coat pocket from his speech at K-State, since it was the last speech he gave
That is a fact.
The last college speech that he ever gave. And it's pretty fun, and it's a fact.
Something that he spoke about in the Beyond Vietnam speech, which was, I was told, was pretty similar to the one he gave, was that he spoke out against how it was ironic that African Americans were used to take away freedoms from others, talking about the stuff going on in Vietnam. And that was a big point of why he didn't align with going to Vietnam and why he was against it. Dr. King also said that he can never support a war where he can't support a country who spends $500,000 on every Viet Cong killed, but only $53 for every person in the states living in poverty. I'm not sure how correct that stat is, but if it is true, that is kind of crazy to think about.
I feel like that's also a very relevant issue today about the government spending. I feel like a lot of people have a problem with kind of like how the government spends its money and how we focus on a lot of international stuff instead of focusing on stuff like more problems that help us people in the actual United States of America, which is pretty interesting how that hasn't really changed in the last 50
Or
years.
just how that's still a relevant topic.
How that's still like a relevant topic that people talk about today.
So for this last part of our podcast, we're going to be talking about the key takeaways from his speech and how it impacted the world and the greater Manhattan community.
All right, I'm going to start it off. When some white people heard of Dr. King's death, they went and wanted to make sure their black friends were doing all right. But King was not a friend of African Americans more than Caucasians.
Yeah, that excerpt, what he just read from, is from the, it's like the little paper thing they hand out at funerals.
All right, I think in my opinion, I think society today, we still have our problems and we're still evolving and still getting better at this race to equality. But if you look back to 50 years ago, it was much, much worse. You couldn't even hang out with your friends who were African American, which I think was terrible. A question that we asked our interviewee was about the tension inside the building at Ahern, but he said the crowd was very respectful and was there for a purpose, and he talked more about Vietnam than the civil rights movement, like we've said multiple times today.
The person we interviewed, by the way, was Steve Fisher. Just throwing that out there. Thank you for letting us do an interview. It was a good time, and I think I was the one that did, so I feel like I learned a lot more about it, and it seemed a lot more real, knowing that there's people from our community, probably a lot more than you'd think, that were actually there and have heard Martin Luther King speak. From one of my sources, I don't remember which one, but I remember he talked about how K-State brought relief to him just from him going to all these places in the Deep South where the racial tensions were much higher. It made a lot of people talked about how he was very sad and seemed tired during the speech, but he said to, I think, some reporter afterwards that places like Manhattan, Kansas uplift his mood and make him feel a little bit happier about the world, which I think is a good way to end this.
That's good. But I also think that there's actually a lot of, you said there's a lot of people that were here, but it really wasn't that long ago if you think about it. I mean, my dad was born in 6 years after he died. So, I mean, if you just think about it, it wasn't really that far.
That is a good place to end.
And that's a wrap. Wait, Will, do you hear that?
No. I hear it too.